Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Rose and Rubini podcast, Making Sense of This World. My name is Banas Chavla, and as always, I'm really pleased to be joined by CEO and Head of Research Nella Rosa. This week, we're going to take a look back at the volatile year that was 2024. In fact, a year lived dangerously. Brunel, we all knew we'd be going into, a volatile year, but not as much as we might have initially expected as it turned out to be. Let's start with the global economy. What did you expect? What materialized, and how different were these two pictures?
So last year we published an outlook titled 2024, a year of living dangerously in geopolitics and politics, while the global economy will remain resilient. And in fact, as you said, both things materialize. So if we start from the economy, um, the global economy has not collapsed as some thought would as a result of the sharp increase in interest rate engineered by the major central banks, both in EM and DMs, and therefore, people thought, oh my goodness, there would be such a drag on economic activity that eventually there might even be a recession. Actually, that did not materialize. Maybe the economy was not as strong as in 2022 and 23, which was though the result of the big contraction due to the pandemic. But overall, the global economy continue to grow at, let's say, decent to mediocre pace, depending on how you look at things. But the US has definitely outperformed expectations. The economies has remained solid, I would say, and we saw during the last press conference by David Powell. China has decelerated as expected, but probably less so than initially feared, thanks to the monetary and fiscal action of the government. The Eurozone probably is the continent and the region that is done probably slightly worse because Germany has decelerated much more than initially expected, and other countries are starting to feel the pain as well of the combined wars in Israel, in Ukraine, and of course the still biting effects of the energy crisis. Labor markets have remained resilient, with unemployment rates actually close to um, all-time lows, but wage growth has likely moderated, and that has helped inflation to return towards central bank targets.
Yeah, and let's talk a bit more about central banks because they've pivoted, moving from tightening to pausing to easing over the last 12 months. Across the various central banks we've covered, and we've, alluded to this numerous times over the year. What's the macro picture that you've seen?
So central banks have observed all this, the economy being slightly weaker but resilient, but inflation collapsing, and therefore there was no reason to keep interest rates as high as they were. So all of them embarked in some form of easing cycle after the uh, pause, which was more or less prolonged 6 to 9 months. The Fed cut by 100 basis points with a surprise cut in September by 50, followed by two additional cuts until December when Jay Powell announced that this pace of easing would moderate in 2025, and that caused, in fact, kind of a severe market reaction. The ECB has done the same. They have cut several times. Also by 100 basis points starting from June, and will probably do more in 2025, probably accelerating the pace. So most likely at every meeting until June, if not July. The Bank of England instead has adopted a more gradual approach to easing, with interest rate being cut every quarter in coincidence with the monetary policy report. As usual, the Bank of Japan being a bit of an ally and has starting increasing rates. They hiked twice, brought the base rate to 0.25%, around that level, as they say in the communique, and they would probably do more in coming months, most likely starting from January itself. Given all these, markets have been actually quite buoyant. Equities have done extremely well. The bond market initially did very well as central banks cut rates. Then it was a bit of a bloodbath at the end of the year when the Fed announced a slower rate of easing in 2025. Commodities, oil has remained around decent level, so some of the geopolitical tensions not translated in higher oil prices, but gold prices instead have really skyrocketed thanks to the increase in counterparty risk due to deflation fears. And we see, in fact, that China is really flirting with deflation. In the alternative asset space, the Bitcoin has done extremely well and has reached $100,000 per Bitcoin, and there are indications they may go further up during the year as the US administration has a much more favorable stance to that compared to the previous ones.
Hmm. And then looking to, geopolitics where things might be most turbulent, but also politics, the year of elections around the world where the most amount of people went to the polls. What were the two sort of different pictures you saw here?
So, in geopolitics, the war in Ukraine has continued, and although there are hopes that it might end in 2025, we really need to see what the conditions could be for first a ceasefire and secondly a potential lasting peace, because what's acceptable for Zelensky is not acceptable to Putin and vice versa. Um, and what's acceptable to potentially the Americans is not necessarily acceptable to the Europeans. So, finding a composition of this of all these a very fragile equilibria would be extremely hard. In the Middle East, we know the expansion of the conflict in Gaza to the West Bank and South Lebanon first eventually resulted in the collapse, in the sudden collapse of the Syrian regime, literally in the space of 2 weeks, with Assad fleeing the country, going to Moscow, and a new government being installed, and God knows how things will evolve there. Clearly, that has marked a bit of a defeat for Russia and a bit of a triumph, I would say, for Turkey, but there is a new equilibrium that needs to be judged there. The situation in Taiwan, the other hot area, has remained stable, thank God. And after the elections in January last year, this was the beginning of the super long cycle of elections that we witnessed in 2024. China has been more relaxed because while the Kuomintang didn't win the presidential election, the winning party didn't have enough of a majority to threaten the status quo. So
Mm.
I would say geopolitically, that's the situation. On the political front, as you suggested, half of the world went to the polls. Most elections went more or less as expected. New elections came out that were unexpected, such as in France. That caused massive political instability, and has not been resolved. And we have discussed this in our reports. Clearly, the biggest of all took place US presidential elections. They were probably less troublesome than some might have thought, including ourselves, because Trump won convincingly with his whip. Probably, if it was the other way around, if Kamala Harris had won potentially narrowly, we would have seen much more trouble because very unlikely Trump would have accepted and conceded victory. But things have gone the way they've gone. Trump is there. I would say under the very close influence of his biggest fund provider, so Elon Musk. We have spoken about this tech takeover by Musk and Thiel of the US presidency. I think in 2025 this will become even more evident. Um, Unfortunately, if we look at things from a broader perspective, we continue to see a strengthening of the more autocratic regimes, a shift from liberal democracies towards electoral democracies, and from electoral democracies to electoral autocracies. So this is not a good development in our view, but it seems very hard to to stop at this stage. If anything, more trouble may be coming with the elections that we are going to be seeing very soon. For example, in February in Germany, where snap elections have been called, and we saw that the AfD is already second party in the polls and is receiving plenty of actually unrequested and to a very large extent unnecessary and unwelcome support from Elon Musk. Um, but that's the situation. If AfD were to become determinant to form a government in Germany, you will see a massive shift in European politics. And we'll discuss this further. We have just published the report on the policies that the AfD proposes, and they will be pretty disruptive. Anyway, there's plenty to watch in 2025, and I'm sure we will focus on all the major things going forward.
Absolutely. I think after a, sort of blockbuster volatile year in 2024, there's very much more that could still go wrong, unfortunately, and a lot of volatility, given the elections that are happening, the conflicts that continue, and the sort of situation of markets around the world. So plenty for us to cover, that will continue to do so. But as always, Ronald, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you. Until next time, and Happy New Year.